What's going on, everybody? It's Bob or Dog Q Bones. We are back with another gameplay review. You gotta love it. This time we have a different person, different deck. Uh, this is a member of the Discord. His name's Tom. Like Mike, he's also a constant Mythic player. Today he's playing Jund Food. This is his qualifier, I believe. Yeah, it's his qualifying run. He wanted me to watch over a few of his matches, give him my thoughts. I think he has some great games on here, and this is the first one. So let's just dive right into it. Also, I moved my beautiful melon away from the right side of the screen so you guys can see the cards easier. Sorry about that. I didn't realize until I finished the second video how much I was obstructing the board. But anyway, take a look at the opening hand. It's looking really good so far. You got lands, you got spells, you already got your Cat Oven Loop, got all your colors. There's not much to consider here. The only misplay I could see is that he's using the D&D lands. Like, why? There's so much better land arts. What are you doing, Tom? That's a throw, but what can you do? As every sacrifice player would know, you always want to start with the oven. You don't want to expose your cat to a removal spell, and then you can't bring the cat back easily until you sacrifice another creature or find another food. Big pain. Okay, so from blue-red pathway into Dragon Rage Channeler, we could safely assume that this is going to be Izzet Phoenix. I'm just going to pause the video quickly because we're actually already at our first mistake. So, I really like how he played Oven first. He drew a second cat for turn, but then decided to just go tap lands and play one cat. I think that's a mistake. So, I understand that you want to preserve your life against Phoenix. That does make a lot of sense to me. And shocking yourself in does feel a little bit bad. It's not amazing. But putting two cats on board does present a reasonable amount of pressure. Sure, you're shocking yourself for two. However, you're pinging the opponent for one. You're getting an extra blocker on board. That's an extra damage. Every subsequent turn, you're not casting the cat, right? Like, and even if you're playing around, say, a Pillar Flame or a Magma Spray, and you're afraid that they might hit one of your cats, you still have a backup one. So not just shocking in and playing the second cat doesn't really make that much sense to me. If you're that concerned about taking the two, you even have the Darkboar pathway, and you just put that on black. You don't need both sources on green. You only play, what, 3 to 4 green cards in your deck, and they're all single pips? Like, yeah, it would be nice to have multiple green sources out, but it's not, like, a necessity for most games. So I think playing out the second cat here would have made a lot of sense, because you also have to consider what happens next turn, right? So you just draw another land for turn. I'll continue as this goes on. So you draw another land for turn. What are you going to do? Are you just going to play a cat and then nothing else? Or are you going to get back your Gigantha? Well, then you're missing 2 functional points of damage, right? And that error is just further compounded on, and it's really awkward. So you definitely wanted to play the second cat there. But let's continue. So as I said before, pretty clear, if you wasn't sure before, that this is a Phoenix deck. Phoenix is doing Phoenix things. I watched through this match already, and I took my notes, so I'm not going to spend too long on what the Phoenix player is doing. Without knowing their hand, it's really hard to say what they're doing is correct, incorrect, but, they seem to be playing very well, so I don't have much to comment on them. So we're mostly concerned about Tom's gameplay. They binned a Phoenix and an Oxyvagonus, pretty good pins, obviously, for Faithless Looting. Tom puts the cat in the oven and brings it back so he can attack with it. Makes perfect sense to me. All right, so luckily for Tom, he didn't actually get too punished from his slight misplay last turn because he drew a Gilded Goose. What Gilded Goose is going to allow is that now there's no question in his mind. There's no point in getting Gigantha. You have 2 plays, and you have a way to accelerate into Corvault. So that was probably his best draw, or at least one of his best draws. So let's see. How does the opponent respond to this feline fighting force? An expressive iteration, that's good, but it's not Corvault next turn good. So I guess it depends on what they hit precisely. They do get Delirium. It's a pretty fast Delirium, turn 3. That's pretty good. And they're also filling up their yard. There's no way they could bring back Phoenix this turn because they already spent 2 mana. They only have a potential land drop left. So you're not taking too much damage this turn at least. and they drew an opt. Okay. So they get a free opt or whatever. Bam, we'll skip ahead 5 seconds. This video is on YouTube, so I just get to skip around a little bit more than I could in the previous ones, which is nice. You love to see it. Opt bottom, draw a card, sure. Get smacked in the face for 3. Obviously, we're not blocking here. We want that Gilded Goose to live. No real consideration there. And Tom does, the typical great line here. Puts the cat in the oven. However, he knows that he's going to cast Corval next turn no matter what, so he keeps the cat in the graveyard, doesn't bring it back to get extra sacrifice triggers. Makes perfect sense. That's exactly what you want to be doing. Another very savvy line is that he holds full control, so what he could do is that he could sacrifice some stuff before the Corval trigger resolves and get a little bit more information. What you generally do at this point is that you go through a cat loop, and then you have excess information, right? Then you could decide your sacrifice. However, Tom makes a misstep here. So he does the right play in holding full control into, bringing back the cat, but he should have just completed that cat loop. Because say he does 2 more sacrifices, right? One putting the cat in the oven and one bringing it back. Say you draw 2 more lands. Well, then maybe you're not sacrificing a Cauldron Familiar. You probably still are, but you could also just sacrifice a land and just preserve the Cauldron Familiar. Realistically, you probably want 1 cat in the yard just for safety, just in case they happen to play like main deck Anger of the Gods. That's pretty niche, but you never know, right? But it's much more important to get as much information as you can from your draw steps before making a decision like this. Is it a huge misplay? No, I wouldn't say so, but it definitely is one. Furthermore, actually, well, we're going to see it later too, but I guess a little spoiler alert. So, let's see. Does he decide to put the second cat in the oven before he passes back? Well, Tom, we're waiting. Oh my goodness. Again, not like, it's seemingly not a big deal, but this actually has very big implications. So because Tom didn't do the cat loop the first time, didn't put cat in the oven the second time, now he's actually exposing his Corval to Unholy Heat. We know that the opponent already has Delirium because the Dragon Range Channeler is a 3/3. So now Tom is put into this really awkward scenario where if he goes for the cat loop again and they have an Unholy Heat, he just loses the Corval for free. Or even in the best case scenario where they don't even have Unholy Heat but have something like a Brazen Borrower. So say you go for the cat loop and they like Brazen Borrower it or something, which is not the best case scenario, but I mean best case in terms of if they do have interaction. You still lose out on a card that you wouldn't have before. You do recoup it the turn after, I guess, so it's not the biggest deal either way. But doing this line definitely hurts your ability just to draw more cards this turn, because now there's no way he can justify putting the cat in the oven if he just gets blown out by a 1-mana spell, right? So 2 really small missteps from Tom actually having really, really big consequences. Now he's losing out on 2 full cards this turn and 2 counters. If he did it preemptively, the game is probably already over. Now there's a little bit more play. They're realistically probably still dead. Turn 4 Corvold. They don't have too much going on. Their best possible line is presumably like Faithless Looting, maybe bin another Phoenix, or if they're really lucky too, bring back a bunch. Then, it's still a game because they have a lot of blockers. If they just keep recurring Phoenixes and pinging in the air, that'd be very powerful. But you're still just drawing so many cards with Corvold. It's going to be hard for the Phoenix player to keep up. And most Phoenix lists don't have an excess of answers to a big Corvold main deck. Nevertheless, Phoenix is doing Phoenix things. Let's take this opportunity to grab my water, which is over here. Stay hydrated, y'all. I love water. Drink like 1.5 gallons a day. It's great, honestly. Gotta pee a lot, but what can you do? They're still just doing Phoenix things. Cantrips, cantrips, cantrips. More cantrips. More cantrips. and they're keeping open 1 mana. So they didn't happen to find a second Phoenix, so they seem pretty dead at this point. So this is a pretty aggressive attack. I'm not so sure if the opponent wanted to do that. It's hard to say without knowing their hands, but Tom, very savvy, doesn't take it, figuring that, like, okay, they're trying to force a block, trying to use another removal spell. And again, savvy, Tom realized that he made the mistake. He can't put the cat in the oven because of Unholy Heat specifically, so he decides not to. So what do? You stuff the cat in the oven now because it's insulated. There's no 1 mana card that's going to blow him out. So let's see what the opponent does. So as predicted, they had the Unholy Heat. However, now Tom could just simply make a food, crack it to get a Cauldron Familiar back, avoid the Unholy Heat. The opponent at this juncture presumably was just hoping that Tom missed that interaction. Not that it was a misplay on Bay's part. That was probably their best line, almost certainly. Just had to hope that the opponent messed up. Very savvy from Bay, but also very savvy from Tom for not missing that. So I'll bring back the second cat, put him to 12, get another card. It's a lot of good going on. They're very close to dead. However, very quick note. So we drew a few cards that turn. We drew Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, and the Phyrexian Tower, I believe. Or we already have Tower in hand. The Swamp. Tom decides to go for the Swamp here. Again, very small things, but I think that was a mistake. If you instead go for Phyrexian Tower, so these cats aren't doing too much right now, right? They're sitting on board, but opponent has double flyer. If you tower, sacrifice Cauldron Familiar, you get the double block you need to both play Thoughtseize and push, which seems really good right now because you get to kill a Dragon Rage Channeler and you get to strip their hand of their best card. Maybe it's in their removal spell or something. And if you draw into another oven, if you draw into a Mayhem Devil, with you still have 2 black floating, right, from the Phyrexian Tower activation, that's lethal. If you draw another Cauldron Familiar, I believe that's also lethal, right? Yeah, that's also lethal. So you actually have a reasonable amount of draws to just kill the opponent this turn. Don't even let them untap. However, if you play the Swamp, it's very likely that they're going to untap for turn. Does it matter? Probably not. You're very far ahead. I doubt that there's anything they can realistically do at this point to get back into this game. But why give them any outs, right? Furthermore, you probably want a cat in the yard anyway. As I said, what if they just happen to play Anger of the Gods? Say if they go Anger of the Gods into Brazen Borrower or something, right? So here, Tom starts with Thoughtseize. Let's back up a little bit so we can see that hand a little quicker. Or a little less quick, rather. I'll try to pause it at a good frame. Oh, there we go. All right. Starts with the Thoughtseize, makes perfect sense. You want your Fatal Push decision to be dictated by what you see in the hand. We have Crackling Drake, Storming Entity, Expressive Iteration, and the opponent's pretty much on, death's door. Interestingly enough, Tom goes after the Crackling Drake really quickly, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So, if we go back to Mike's games that we played, I believe it was the first video. Can't remember if it was the first or no, it was the second video, I'm sorry. Where we talked about when you're really far ahead and it's your game to lose. Where you're so far ahead and you just have to start thinking about every possible way you can lose. Because even if it's super unlikely, there is still a chance that the opponent can find something. So, when they have Stormwing Entity, that doesn't do anything. We don't have to worry about that. They have Crackling Drake, which does do something technically. It's a big blocker. It can block Corvold reasonably and draws them a card, right? Or they have Expressive Iteration. The thing is, Crackling Drake doesn't actually accomplish anything, right? Because all it does is block Corvold for a turn. So what's the worst possible thing that can happen if you let them keep Crackling Drake, right? Based on how you're at least playing it so far. So you Thoughtseize them. You take Expressive Iteration. You let them You attack, you put him to 2, you sacrifice presumably a land. So what could they possibly do at this point? If they go land Crackling Drake, Unholy Heat, kill something, there's just still dead on the crackback because you have double cats in an oven. And you have a Gilded Goose to help produce food. They can kill a goose, but you just attack with both Cauldron Familiars, and you just sacrifice the one they block, and they don't really have outs at that point. However, if you let them keep the expressive iteration, they might draw into something that we're not even expecting. And then maybe if they go, I don't know, I can't even think of a combination of cards realistically, but letting them keep the Crackling Drake just seems like slightly higher EV because that's just not going to win them the game, and them only seeing one card and stalling for a turn seems a lot better than them seeing 3 cards and maybe surprising you with something you're not expecting. Probably not much of a consideration either way, but like hypothetically, say they go Brazen Borrower and I was gonna say like Grafdigger's Cage, but I don't think Phoenix would be playing Grafdigger's Cage main. But I guess because there's really no combination of cards that can kill Tom if they let him keep the iteration, then taking the Crackling Drake is fine because they could hypothetically stall for the turn, even though it doesn't really work out that way because you could just not cast the Fatal Push the next turn, sacrifice something, Fatal Push the Crackling Drake, then swing in. But I guess I'm pretty much splitting hairs here, but I don't believe that there's any way they can win if they keep the Crackling Drake, and maybe there's a way they can win if they keep Expressive Iteration. Realistically, probably not. But there are these small things that, in this particular game doesn't matter, but in another game could. I believe I've said that a few times already, but you never know, right? Like if they had more mana, maybe they could have found a way out of this. I don't think with 5 mana and an Expressive Iteration there's really any out. And I believe that cast iteration digging, realize their impending doom. Oh, also a very savvy thing from Tom is that he didn't play the Fatal Push. He could have just pushed the Dragon's Rage channel. He just chose not to. He's going to do it offensively instead. I really like that one. Let's see. I realize my head is now blocking the sideboarding a little bit. There we go. I've shrunk a few inches, but that's okay. So he's got a few boarding options. The ones I like the most are Klothys, Forced Landing, and Soul Guide Lantern. Those seem to be pretty obvious. What to take out, though? That's a bit harder because you don't have any card that's particularly bad. I believe he took out the Thoughtseizes. Let's see, hold on. Let's take a look at that boarding. Looks like he took out Thoughtseizes, unless he started the boarding with that. I don't believe he did. I'm pretty sure those remain. Let's see. He started with 2 main. Okay. He took out Bindings and Thoughtseizes. Okay. There we go. He's got Bindings, Thoughtseizes, puts in Soul Guide Lanterns, the Forced Landing, which makes perfect sense, and 1 Klothys, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think you'd want both Klothyses. It just seems really good in this matchup. Where Ravenous Squirrel, for example, is just whatever. It's a good card if you get it going early, but if you draw it late, it's not great. But Klothys, you could draw it at pretty much every point in the game, and it's going to be really good for you. Opponent's boarding, opponent's boarding, opponent's boarding. Just got to keep going. But anyway, I like Tom's boarding overall. I think the second Klothys would have been better than the 4th Squirrel, but not a big deal. There we go. Okay. So this is a really interesting hand. You can't really cast much early. Oh, let me fix my camera before I forget. Bam. Can't really cast much early, but I think it is reasonable. You have Cat Oven already. Just seems fine. He did draw Stomping Grounds, and he decides to go straight for the Gilded Goose line, which I really like. That opens him up to a lot of different plays next turn, and could even produce the requisite black. Maybe you could play a Fabled Passage early. It just opens up all of your lines. So seems like a strong keep, great draw, great turn 1 play. So Tom draws the Klothys for turn, which I thought was, obviously another great draw. However, I do not love playing the Klothys there. The opponent passes with 2 mana up. You have to consider, what could they have, right? They didn't go for Opt turn 1. They didn't go for Considers or whatever. No lootings, nothing. So you have to assume, loading, you have to assume that they're holding open interaction. What's the most likely interaction they'll be playing? They have Aether Gust. They have Brazen Borrowers. They could have a Braid, hypothetically. Or they can just have like random creature removal, right? So Klothys does play around the random creature removal, but it plays really poorly into Borrower and Aether Gust. Where, if you actually just go triple 1-drop this turn, so you start with Oven into Familiar, and then you go Squirrel, I think that's just so much better. It just plays around pretty much every single line they could possibly have, right? Because Gust is not good against Squirrel, Borrower is not good against any of those, the removal is not great because you're going to have an Oven to insulate. And if they have a Braid, which would be pretty much the worst possible for you if you went for the triple 1-drop line, it's not like you lose in any capacity. You just lose your Oven. And then the next turn you have a Klothys to follow up with, so it's still really good. So even if they had the best possible line, if you go for triple 1-drop of a Braid your Oven, anger your board, Klothys is still really good at that juncture. Sure, that's really bad for you. I'm not arguing that. But Klothys is still great there, where if you go with this line, the most likely plays of Gust or Borrower are pretty nuts against you because you lost your food and your turn functionally. So let's see if they have it, though. Skip ahead 5 seconds. They don't have to do it on the stack if it's Gust necessarily, so maybe they're just considering it. However, they seem to not have it, which is really lucky. So now this play looks good. But the thing is, if they don't cast any spells, then Klothys still doesn't do anything this turn anyway, which is fine, but it's not ideal. However, they go for an iteration, which is pretty much the best possible. So they haven't done anything the first 2 turns and giving you something to use Klothys on turn 3. Pretty brutal for Bay at this point. So let's say, and they don't even hit a land, just like the nightmare scenario with Expressive Iteration. They had a land in hand at least, but it wasn't even a blue land, so they can't even opt. Super rough. All right, so his line is forced. He has to take that. Plays a passage, so he can only cast 2 spells this turn. He doesn't have the black, so he's going to cast the only 2 spells he has. Makes perfect sense. And then we're just hanging out. Just pass on straight to the opponent's turn. And let's see what they have. There's tanking, they're tanking. Passing. So no land drop pass. Okay, no land drop pass. Pretty easy crack here. You could hypothetically wait until you play the second Fabled Passage because you could draw a basic, and maybe you want to draw a basic, but I like cracking here because you want to be able to use the Klothys ability. What you could do, you could full control. You could full control, draw, see if you drew a basic, then crack, but like now we're getting really cute for what seems to be not very much percentage points, and I don't think you'd actually want to draw a land at this point. I think you'd rather draw spells, especially because your opponent's so far behind. So, you get the lands. You get to exile a land with Klothys. So, Tom here, by cracking the Fabled Passage now, is saying that he's looking to cast Corvold. And similar to the Klothys line, I believe, once again, this is a mistake. Because you have to consider one of the most likely cards that the opponent is holding at this point. Because they're doing quite literally nothing, we can assume that they have all gas. So what I would do at this point is that you have the Fabled Passage, you have 3 mana, and you have the extra mana from Klothys. You can go Cauldron Familiar, Mayhem Devil, still have the Fabled Passage uncracked, and then you can attack with Squirrel, and then you could start doing Mayhem Devil things if you want, or just pass it over, see what they have. That puts you in such a strong position because it plays better around the borrower, plays better around Aether Gust, and it doesn't play around the Abrade necessarily, or like another random creature removal spell as Corvold would. But again, that just seems like such low priority because you're still establishing a board. You have a Clothis, you have Cat Elven going, that they spend their entire turn just like upgrading a Mayhem Devil. You are 100% okay with that because you still have a Corvold in hand, you still have Gigantha. There's just really nothing that can go wrong for you. But if you go for Corvold here, there's a lot that can go wrong for you, right? If they happen to have a Gust or a Brazen Borrower, they let Corvold resolve, trigger on the stack, they just bounce it. So you're still forced to sacrifice something, but you don't even get a card out of it. That puts Tom in an awkward scenario where now he feels forced that maybe I should sacrifice something in response. Maybe sacrifice like the Gilded Goose to the Oven so he could at least draw a card and then sacrifice the food. That's like okay, I guess, but that's still pretty bad for him. Because if he doesn't draw a land, he happens to, but if he doesn't draw a land, he's going to have a hard time recasting this Corvold, at least in the immediate future. So I really don't love this line. It's obviously the highest reward line, but I don't think it mitigates the bad things your opponent can have and likely does have. And as we see, they actually did have the Brazen Borrower, but they didn't do it in response for whatever reason. Maybe they just missed the timing window. Who knows? But I think that would have been pretty bad for Tom if they borrowed with the Corvold trigger on the stack. Nevertheless, though, the opponent just seems so under the gun. Bouncing Corvold was fine and all, but because they allowed Tom to draw a card, it's so much worse, especially when they're already mana screwed. They have an opt, maybe they can find some gas, but this is looking pretty horrendous for the opponent at this point, especially with a Clothis still ticking by on board. DRC, sure. Doesn't really do anything. Yeah, just like, what can they realistically do on 1 mana? They have Unholy Heat. Some lists even play Lightning Axe. That's all well and good, but... So Tom has to decide what to exile with Clothis, so presumably you just hit the opt, right? Because why wouldn't you? However, I really, really like how Tom played this. So he's figuring, like, know what? They can't counter my Corvold at this point with just 1 mana. If I grab the Fabled Passage so I get an extra mana, I can go Cauldron Familiar into Corvold. Really, really nice line from Tom. Excellent work. Really, really like that. So once again, he holds full control, casts a Corvold, and of course it's going to resolve because they can't counter it for just 1 mana. So this time, Tom actually does the correct sequence of sacrificing the Cauldron Familiar before the trigger resolves. However, I believe, if I remember correctly, that they have the Lightning Axe this time around, discarding a Phoenix. So doing the correct sequencing actually punished Tom here. So that begs the question, was that the correct sequencing after all? Personally, I would say no, that actually wasn't the correct sequencing now. You have an excess of lands, and the only possible way you can get punished for doing the sequence is Lightning Axe, a card that Phoenix generally plays like 2 of in most lists. Maybe 1, depends on the particular list, right? But you have so many lands, you have another pathway in hand as well. There's just no real reason to do it like this. If you just sacrifice a land and pass the turn, what can the opponent do, right? It's kind of like a similar scenario with the Unholy Heat problem from last game. But because they're already so behind and they are at such a mana disadvantage, forcing them to not be able to use their mana efficiently or to force them to hold open 1 mana again is just a nightmare scenario, right? So if they don't draw land again, what are they going to do? Sure, they can just hold open a mana, but then you just don't have to use your cat loop, and then when you untap, then the Lightning Axe is functionally just dead in their hands. They go for it instantly, obviously that doesn't work. If they tap out, then you can do the cat loop freely. So if you just wait and sacrifice a land, they just have no good plays. So I really just like waiting at this point. Unfortunately, Tom does the generally correct line and gets a bit punished for it. Is it the end of the world? Not necessarily. However, the opponent just hit 2 Phoenixes, one off the Lightning Axe, one off the top, with the Surveil trigger from Dragon's Rage Channeler. So this is actually kind of a scary scenario now. If they recur 2 Phoenixes, Tom isn't dead by any means. But like this is a lot more of a game than it had to be. Like this game was functionally over if Tom just sacrificed the land, which he ended up doing anyway, right? Instead of going for the cat loop instantly. Because now this is really, really awkward for him. So let's see. Can the opponent capitalize? They have the 4th land, so they finally drew out of their rut. Let's see what they got. Presumably just a bunch of random cantrips. I'll skip ahead a little bit, see what's up. So they actually have an Aether Gust first, targeting the Clothis. Seems very reasonable. So now Tom has a decision on whether or not he wants to top or bottom the Clothis. Let's find out. What does he choose? Tom's thinking it over. He decides against topping the Clothis, which I actually really like. Clothis is very good against Phoenix, but they have to spend an entire turn redeploying it. It's definitely not ideal. And at that juncture, so it turns out they don't have a way to recur the Phoenixes. But at that juncture, it seemed that they probably did. And Clothis was just going to be too slow to contend with double Phoenixes. So I really like the bottom there. Thought that was heads up on Tom's part. Stormwing Entity, though, that's fine. Not a big deal. Take the attack. You're not looking to trade. That's fine. And now you still have a relatively strong turn. You get to just cast your hands, and you get double squirrels. On top of that, you also get to kill the Stormwing Entity, which is really gross. So you get to kill Stormwing Entity for turn. Just grow both your squirrels, have an insane board, and it's going to be really, really hard for Phoenix to come back from this spot. If they were able to actually bring back double Phoenix, I would say this game was going to be closer. Still, I think Tom was pretty favored, but nevertheless. So now you have a decision on whether or not you want to cast the Cauldron Familiar. I really, really like holding it. At this point, there's no way they're going to be able to block all your creatures, so you could presumably have lethal anyway. So just to play around the case where they could somehow exile both Cauldron Familiars, I just really like that line. Because that, again, this is your game to lose, right? How are you most likely to lose? Even if you can't even think of the particular card, it's like, well, if I lose both Cauldron Familiars and they somehow deal with my squirrels, that's how I can lose. So, holding the Cauldron Familiar, you insulate yourself from that. Very nice. They go for Consider. See if they have any way out. They need to be able to kill a Spam Devil, but with hitting Expressive Iteration, their only real out is that they have to kill the devil, maybe with like a Lightning Axe or an Unholy Heat. But if they have Unholy Heat that can kill a devil, then their Dragon Rage Channeler is forced to attack, and they're going to die regardless. So, yeah, the Dragon's Rage Channeler is forced to attack. They get both Phoenixes back. So they have to attack the Channeler. You have 4 attackers. You have another Familiar in hand. You just have lethal right there. There's nothing they can do. And that's that. So, once again, just like Mike, I think that was a well-executed game. Tom, like a lot of great players, made very small errors for the most part, but these small errors actually turned out to be pretty game-defining decisions. Because in game 1, not doing the cat loop preemptively stopped him from drawing multiple cards, stopped him from having lethal on the next turn. Again, didn't matter in the context of that game necessarily, but could have otherwise. Game 2, playing out the Clothis could have been punished by Brazen Borrower Gust. Playing out the Corvold instantly could have been punished by the same, and the opponent did have the Borrower, but they missequenced it. And then sacrificing the wrong thing to Corvold actually let the Corvold die, which made the game a lot closer than it had to be. It was functionally over the turn Corvold went down the second time. But by sacrificing the wrong thing and by doing the conventionally correct line, you actually opened yourself up to lose. So I think watching great players make these small mistakes is just super insightful if you're just trying to improve at the game, because improving at these small edges, which seem inconsequential, can actually have very big ramifications on your game. That is Jund versus Is It Phoenix. I hope you liked it. If you want the link to the list, it's going to be in the description. As always, if you like this content, please consider giving this a like, subscribing if you want more of this. I plan on doing a lot of this content. Give me any feedback you want in the comments. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Hope you have a great day.